Good morning, everyone. My name's Lucy and I work at AbilityNet, and one of the things I do at AbilityNet is get involved in what we call our higher education maturity model, and that involves working with some of the universities in the UK and looking at where they sit in terms of their accessibility work. So it's a subject quite close to my heart, and I'm really pleased that we've already in the panel talks this morning touched on the idea of educating the next generation, really, of planting those seeds so accessibility isn't an add-on, it's part of the culture. And when we're training particularly perhaps the UX designers of the future, the people working in the corporations, making sure that accessibility is something that they're aware of, something they're familiar with, and something they have the confidence to go into their future careers in already knowing about. So that's in the higher education sector, but also ideally even lower down when we're teaching our young people in schools, when they're developing, that accessibility is something that's just part of what they do. So I'm really delighted to welcome Kate and Regine, who've come over from the States to talk about this topic. So Kate works for a charity called Teach Access, and Regine is a trustee on that charity, but also teaches at New York University and some of the UX design courses. So I'm really hoping they're going to give you some insight into that kind of work. So if I start with you, Kate, what I really want to hear about is the story of Teach Access, is what you do, what's important to you, and the messages that you're trying to get across.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us here. My name is Kate Sonka. I'm the executive director for Teach Access. And Susanna in the earlier session really kind of talked about what we are doing. And that's really looking at closing something called the accessibility technology skills gap. And so it's this idea that industry, and we use that term largely. So it came out of conversations with the tech industry in Silicon Valley, in the US, but really it includes all industry. But industry can't find enough recent graduates from university who know anything about accessibility or have heard it, because it isn't being taught broadly, across universities in the US, of course. That's where we've been working out of. And so a group of people back in 2016 came together, and the strength of what we do is really in that collaborative effort. And so that includes industry professionals, certainly accessibility professionals and experts, but really industry, anyone in industry. It includes education. So that's certainly higher ed is where we've been working. Of course, disability organizations. We can't and wouldn't be doing this work without ensuring that they're with us every step of the way. And as well in the U.S. Government, so local and federal, we've had some collaboration there as well. And so these entities coming together to really answer this question of how do we help prepare more students to know something about it? And that was sort of mentioned earlier in the session. We aren't looking to create all experts. We will always need experts. We know that. We need all of you in this room for sure. But imagine if you had new cohorts of new hires coming into your organizations who at least knew that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines exist, or that there is such a thing as accessibility, and that it has to be and must be included from the beginning of any design or development process. Imagine how that advances the entire field of accessibility, that we would have new hires coming in saying, I think we have to include accessibility right now. Here's as much as I know. Now let's go find the accessibility team or find others who can help us with that. And so for us, we really do this work through support of faculty. We do some programming direct to students. It's important to understand what motivates them, what are they interested in. But we really spend the bulk of our time working with faculty to understand what type of training might you need to feel comfortable and knowledgeable to teach this in a class that you're already teaching. What sort of materials might you need? Resources, curricular items. Our intention is really to work with faculty in courses they're already teaching. The reason being, we want students to hear about this through every course. Everything they're doing, they're hearing about it again and again, and it becomes very common for them to hear about accessibility. It's great when we can encourage a faculty member or college or university to create a whole course on this, or a major or a minor, but that takes some time. So we're really looking at what can we do to support faculty right now in the courses that they're teaching.
Thank you, Kate. Regine, I'm sure the audience will be really interested to hear some examples about how you've worked with Teach Access and incorporated accessibility into your students' courses. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so I get the pleasure of teaching engineering students about UX design. And I first learned of Teach Access back in 2019 at CSUN, which is a assistive technology conference that happens annually. And I applied for a grant, and I received a grant. And at the time, I was just teaching as a part-time lecturer at New York University. I am now a full-time faculty member. I have been teaching user experience design for 9 years. In the 9 years that I've been teaching user experience design, accessibility has always been part of my classes from the very beginning. Currently, my students work with a real-life client, which is Arissa Labs. Arissa Labs received a grant from NASA, and this particular project is helping make Eclipse accessible for blind and low vision communities. So my students will work on the UI UX for the website. So I'll give you an example. Just this past week, my students learned how to use a screen reader from someone who is blind. So I believe that people need to learn from people with lived experience. I know it, but I don't know it as well as somebody who uses it on a daily basis. And it's really important for my students. So you should have seen their faces when they first heard a screen reader, because they had not heard a screen reader before. And they were so confused, like, what's going on? What's happening? And also them learning it for the first time, they're like, this is so hard. This is so hard. This must be so hard for people. It's that anything you do the first time is hard. Right. And this is what I've said with accessibility and learning accessibility is when you are learning it, it's not easy necessarily. But when you do it repeatedly, right, when people start to implement this into their workflow, the first time is hard. The 5th time, it gets a little easier. The 10th time, it's a little smoother. The 20th time, it's as if nothing. The 50th time, it's just part of what you do. So I would like, when I teach this, I like it to be part of what people do. And the funny thing is, I had a couple of alum students visit my class last week, and one of the students said, the things you're learning in this class, you will take to the workplace. Because when I got my job, I looked at their site and I said, this isn't accessible. You need to do this. The color contrast is off. And I said, yay. Like, that working. Makes me so happy. So it is working.
Okay, thank you. So Kate, if we wanted to mirror the kind of work that you're doing over the States and bring it over to the UK, and I know we've got a few people from various institutions in the room, could you tell me briefly about any barriers that you've encountered, and what would your starting points be? What would you advise?
This is a great question. So I'm still learning, of course, about sort of the environment here and how things, especially around curriculum in the UK and more broadly in Europe, of course, how that comes together. But a challenge is that, and this kind of was a theme that came up this morning and I think a little bit yesterday, we don't have to do all of it right away. It's important to us. We know we want to. But what are the small steps that we can take with faculty? What can we start to encourage them to think about? So if we approach a faculty member or a dean of a school, or however we're approaching people who are thinking about curriculum, what are the ways that we can start to say, this is what we do in the US with faculty, but here as well, I think we could consider you're teaching a topic around graphic design. You're teaching a course in graphic design, and you don't talk about accessibility and teach about it right now. Let's start with color contrast. That's not the end of everything we would need to know about accessibility, right? But that's the first step. And so for us, a challenge is sometimes faculty who are new to this field or new to thinking about how would I put this into a course, feel like, oh my God, there's so much. We don't start with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, although crucial and we all know we need it. That's a lot. That's overwhelming for a faculty member who's new to this space, right? So what are the spaces that we can look at? Here's what you're teaching right now. This could be an interesting topic to start to introduce into that course. And it could be one lecture out of the entire semester or term. It could be a student assignment. It could also be, hey, students, submit your materials in an accessible way. That's as much as I'm going to do this semester, is just teach you all how to, for example, put your paper through the Microsoft Word accessibility checker. That's the starting point. Then the semester after that, now let's start to talk about additional things. And so I think a challenge is sometimes when we approach faculty or they hear about it, they think, I'm not an expert. I'm not prepared to teach this to my students. I don't know where to begin. Yeah, let's start with a smaller step. And I think the same as I've been here for a week working with some great colleagues at University of Southampton. I really think that is a good way to start thinking about that. What are some smaller steps we could start to introduce?
Yeah, because you don't want to overwhelm people,
That's right.
do you? You want to give them the confidence. It's like that saying, you can only eat an elephant one little bite at a time. It's similar to that. So just to finish off, Regine, I would be so interested to know if you've had any feedback from the students that you teach, and also if it's something that they're going to take forward as they go into their careers.
Yeah, I mean, every semester I get a class evaluation, so yeah, I get feedback all the time. But my students take what they learn in the class with them, and wherever they go, even if they can't help but see it. It's just like when learning about user experience design, they know a bad website when they see it. So they know when something is not accessible, and they tend to speak up about it, which is awesome and I love. So that is the feedback that I've received. It has been positive that people are aware, and I think that's so. One of the biggest things for me is to move from awareness to action and not just be aware of it. You have to do something about it as well.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much. It's, let's hope that, these aren't difficult things, are they? It's a lot is about creating awareness and the confidence as well to say when something's not quite right, and to say how simple a change could be, but what a huge difference it could make. So it's really, really valuable work you're doing. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.